In today's world, we hear about trillion-dollar giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon as if they represent the peak of human economic achievement. But what if I told you that 4 centuries ago, a company existed that dwarfed every modern corporation combined? Not just in wealth, but in its ability to reshape the world's economy, redraw borders, influence kings, and build an empire that stretched across oceans. And the craziest part? You've probably never heard its true story. The company was the Verenigde Oostindische Company, known in English as the Dutch East India Company or VOC. At its peak, historians estimate it would have been worth the equivalent of $7.9 trillion today. That's not a typo. That's not a myth. That value is based on documented revenue, assets, share prices, global monopolies, and state-backed privileges that no modern corporation can legally possess. But here's where things get even more unbelievable. Behind this monstrous financial machine was a secretive, royal-backed power structure that influenced everything from the company's rise to its darkest atrocities. Before you click away, trust me, everything you're about to learn will change how you see money, corporations, and global power forever. So before we dive deep into this forgotten empire, make sure you subscribe, watch until the end, and drop your thoughts in the comments. This story connects to the modern world in ways you've likely never imagined. To understand how a company could reach such an impossible valuation, we need to step back to the early 1600s, when the world looked radically different. Europe was in the middle of what historians call the Age of Exploration, but a better name might be the Age of Ruthless Competition. Spices, things we take for granted today like pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg, were once worth more than gold. Ivory, porcelain, and silk shaped entire economies. Whoever controlled the trade routes to Asia controlled the world's wealth. Portugal dominated first, then Spain. But by the late 1500s, a tiny cluster of provinces, what we now call the Netherlands, decided it wasn't going to remain poor or irrelevant. Dutch traders were bold, calculated, and equipped with emerging financial innovations no other nation had mastered. And above them all was the House of Orange-Nassau, a royal dynasty that understood something profound. Power came not from land alone, but from commerce, global, organized, militarized commerce. So in 1602, multiple competing Dutch trading companies were merged into one gigantic entity, the VOC, and given an unimaginable set of powers. Modern corporations can sell products, hire employees, and maybe influence politics. But the VOC? It could build armies, print its own money, forge international treaties, establish colonies, claim land, enslave populations, run prisons, command fleets of warships, and even execute people under its own legal system. Think about that for a moment. A company, not a government, had the authority to wage war. Imagine Amazon having an air force. Imagine Apple negotiating peace treaties. Imagine Microsoft operating its own courts. That was the VOC. It was a fusion of business and state power so total that Wall Street today looks harmless by comparison. And yes, this insane level of authority was given willingly by the Dutch government, because the VOC served as the financial engine that powered the entire Dutch Golden Age. But here's where the history books often gloss over something critical. The VOC's board, known as the 17 Gentlemen, was heavily influenced by the House of Orange. While technically a private corporation, it operated with royal support so deep that historians have found letters and secret directives showing just how involved the monarchy was in shaping VOC policies. The Dutch Republic portrayed itself as a democratic system, but the monarchy's hand was everywhere. The VOC served royal interests, royal wealth, and royal geopolitical strategy. When wars broke out in Europe, VOC ships were redirected. When royal marriages were arranged to strengthen alliances, VOC trade routes were used as bargaining chips. And when rebellions threatened Dutch colonies, VOC soldiers, often more experienced than national armies, were deployed to ensure the dynasty retained control. This isn't speculation. It's documented in archives from Amsterdam to Jakarta. But here's the part that shocks most people. The VOC was also the world's first true multinational corporation, with shareholders, dividends, and publicly traded stock. The world's first stock exchange, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, was created because of the VOC. They invented concepts like limited liability and permanent capital, which form the backbone of every corporation today. Investors could buy shares and earn returns without needing to personally sail to Asia. Think about how modern capitalism works, how global companies function, how financial markets operate, and realized that a massive chunk of that system was born from the VOC's structure. Yet the VOC was not just a business innovation. It was a global power tool. Its ships weren't just carrying spices, they were carrying soldiers, weapons, and political influence across continents. This is where the numbers come in. At its height, the VOC employed over 40,000 workers, maintained hundreds of ships, and controlled thousands of miles of territory across Asia, from Indonesia and Japan to India and South Africa. It dominated the spice trade with a brutality that is rarely acknowledged in mainstream education. Entire islands were depopulated or controlled by force to maintain monopolies. Local rulers were replaced. Ports were seized. Trade agreements were signed under threats of military retaliation. And all of this, every bit of it, flowed money back into Europe, enriching shareholders, strengthening the monarchy, and transforming the tiny Dutch Republic into a global superpower. The VOC's peak valuation of $7.9 trillion in today's money wasn't just because it sold spices. That number comes from analyzing its trade volume, military assets, gold reserves, territorial holdings, and decades of profit extraction. No modern company comes close. Apple at its highest? Around $3 trillion. Aramco? Around $2 trillion. The VOC would eat all of them for breakfast. Yet history classes barely mention it. Why? Because the story of the VOC is also the story of colonialism, exploitation, slavery, and imperial violence, topics that are uncomfortable but absolutely true. The VOC wasn't just a business success. It was a system built on domination and resource extraction. But to understand global economics today, we must understand where these systems came from. And that is why this video matters. Because the VOC's legacy didn't disappear when the company collapsed in the late 1700s. Its financial innovations live on. Its colonial borders left lasting scars. Its commercial networks reshaped entire cultures. Its royal backers influenced European power balances for centuries. And even modern corporations today mimic strategies the VOC pioneered. Global supply chains, exclusive trade rights, private security, government-aligned interests, and monopolistic behaviors. But unlike today's companies, the VOC operated with almost no oversight. No human rights standards, no international law frameworks, no accountability, nothing. Its only mission was profit, and it had the weapons to enforce it. We're about to dive into corruption, royal conspiracies, economic revolutions, secret archives, violent monopolies, and unbelievable decisions that shaped the world as we know it. How did a single company, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, grow to be worth an estimated $7.9 trillion in today's money? That's more than Apple, Amazon, and Google combined. To understand this, we need to look past the mind-boggling numbers and into the dark machinery that powered this global empire. The VOC wasn't built on luck, a booming economy, or even fair trade. It was built on a system so sophisticated and so brutal that it has no modern equivalent. And pulling the levers behind the scenes was the House of Orange, the Dutch Republic's ruling dynasty shaping world events for generations. What makes this story so incredible isn't just the VOC's dominance but how it merged corporate ambition with royal power. It became a company that often acted with more authority than nations themselves. As we dive deeper, you'll discover the layers of innovation, strategic deception, and sheer force that made the VOC both a marvel of human organization and one of history's most controversial institutions. When the VOC was chartered in 1602, the Dutch government gave it powers no corporation today could even dream of. To compete with Spain, Portugal, and England, the Dutch knew they needed a single unified company that could operate swiftly and ruthlessly overseas. So they gave the VOC privileges that read like a king's decree. It could negotiate treaties with Asian rulers as a sovereign nation. It could raise armies, build fortresses, and administer justice, including the death penalty. It could seize foreign ships, establish colonies, mint its own currency, and govern entire populations. And these weren't just symbolic rights. VOC used every single one of them. Its executives, a secretive group known as the Heeren 17, operated like an international oligarchy. They made decisions behind closed doors, often hiding information even from their own shareholders. Their private letters show a level of political maneuvering that today's CEOs could only fantasize about. In many ways, the VOC's board was a shadow government, a private global ruling body backed by both the Dutch state and its royal family. But why would the Dutch Republic let a private company become so powerful? The answer lies in the economic revolution the VOC unleashed. In the early 1600s, the Dutch were fighting for independence from the mighty Spanish Empire. The House of Orange-Nassau, leading the revolt, knew that economic power was the key to their survival. Supporting the VOC wasn't just good business. It was a strategic investment in the nation's future. The company became the engine that fueled the Dutch Golden Age. It funded infrastructure, built ports, supported the military, and swelled the state's tax revenues. Even more importantly, the VOC pioneered concepts that are now the bedrock of global capitalism. It introduced publicly traded shares, allowing ordinary citizens to invest in overseas trade without risking their lives on dangerous voyages. It also created the idea of permanent capital, meaning investors funded the company, not just single voyages. This allowed the VOC to accumulate unprecedented wealth, reinvest its profits, and expand in ways its European rivals couldn't match for decades. The VOC's innovations didn't stop at finance. It revolutionized shipbuilding, creating faster, more durable ships that could carry massive cargo loads across vast distances. It developed new navigational techniques and mapped previously unknown parts of the world, making global trade more predictable and efficient. Its administrative system was centuries ahead of its time, with detailed records, specialized departments, and a management structure so complex that modern multinational corporations still study it today. But we must not mistake the VOC's efficiency for benevolence. Its success came at a horrific human cost. In Indonesia's Banda Islands, the VOC committed one of the worst atrocities of the colonial era. To secure a monopoly on nutmeg, it carried out the Banda Massacre of 1621, where nearly the entire local population was slaughtered or enslaved. Elsewhere, the company imposed forced labor, seized farmlands, manipulated local rulers, and used economic pressure to bankrupt anyone who stood in its way. These were not the actions of rogue captains. This was official company policy, approved by the board and discussed openly among Dutch elites. And this is where the influence of the royal family becomes undeniable. While the Dutch Republic was technically a democracy of provinces, the House of Orange constantly intervened in key VOC decisions, often for geopolitical gain. For instance, the VOC's expansion into the Indian Ocean perfectly aligned with the dynasty's goal of weakening Portugal, a key ally of their main enemy, Catholic Spain. By controlling the spice trade, the VOC gave the Netherlands immense bargaining power in European politics. Members of the royal family frequently invested in the VOC, profiting directly from its global monopolies. Historical archives reveal that the House of Orange used VOC resources to secure alliances, send lavish gifts to foreign rulers, and conduct unofficial diplomacy. In essence, the VOC became the dynasty's financial and geopolitical weapon. It's no exaggeration to say the VOC was the backbone of Dutch power, and the dynasty was the brain directing its every move. As the company grew, it established semi-autonomous hubs across Asia. The most important was Batavia, which is modern-day Jakarta. Batavia became the VOC's Asian headquarters, a walled city with European architecture, courts, prisons, shipyards, and markets. It was a melting pot of cultures, but it was also a place of strict hierarchy and segregation. Europeans held all the power, local populations were heavily taxed, and enslaved people performed much of the labor. The VOC didn't just trade goods. It controlled entire economic ecosystems. It dictated what crops could be grown, set prices, issued trade permits, and enforced its monopolies with military precision. Its ships didn't just sail between Europe and Asia, they dominated regional trade routes, buying and selling goods between dozens of Asian ports, kingdoms, and islands. This intra-Asian trade system generated enormous profits, far beyond what it made from just selling spices in Europe. Many people believe the VOC got rich from cloves and nutmeg, but in reality, a huge portion of its wealth came from its operations within Asia itself. The VOC's strategy was simple: use diplomacy when possible, coercion when necessary, and outright war when profitable. It forged alliances with local rulers, offering weapons or military aid in exchange for exclusive trade rights. It expertly manipulated rivalries between kingdoms, playing them against one another. It dispatched spies, intercepted communications, and spread misinformation to undermine its competitors. The scale of its intelligence operations was extraordinary. Some historians argue the VOC was one of the first corporations to use systematic espionage as a core business strategy. Its ships carried not just cargo but also critical intelligence reports from captains, merchants, and envoys, giving the board an unmatched view of global politics, markets, and military threats. When you combine this intelligence network with its military might, you have a company that was both a business empire and an informal government, with more resources than many European nations of the time. By the mid-1600s, the VOC had reached a scale that is almost impossible to imagine. It operated over 150 merchant ships and 40 warships, with tens of thousands of employees and dozens of fortified colonies. Its annual profits, in some years, would be worth billions of dollars today. It paid out dividends to shareholders that modern investors can only dream of. And through it all, it maintained an aura of secrecy. Internal debates were kept private. Financial details were selectively reported. The company's archives millions of documents stored across Europe and Asia contain evidence of everything from bribery and political manipulation to covert royal directives. Some historians believe that if we could fully digitize all of the VOC's records, we would uncover an even deeper connection between the company's actions and the interests of European royalty. While the VOC's public face was that of a traitor, its hidden gears were deeply political. Yet, despite its unbelievable success, cracks eventually started to form. The VOC grew bureaucratic, slow, and corrupt. Its own executives began enriching themselves through private trade, undermining the company's profits. Competitors, like the British East India Company, grew stronger. Wars in Europe drained the Dutch treasury. By the late 1700s, the unstoppable machine that was the VOC began to slow, crack, and finally collapse. But it didn't happen the way you might think. It wasn't a single disaster or a failed business model. The most powerful company in human history crumbled under the weight of its own success. It became a victim of corruption, war, and the messy reality of ruling a global empire by force. But here's the twist. Even after the VOC dissolved in 1799, its influence never actually disappeared. The systems it created, the financial structures it pioneered, the borders it drew, and the global power dynamics it set in motion, they all secretly shape our world today. This isn't just the story of a company's death. It's the origin story of the world we live in. The seeds of the VOC's downfall were planted during its golden age. As it grew richer and more powerful, its once efficient structure began to rot from the inside. Corruption was everywhere. Executives used company ships for their own private trade, pocketing profits that belonged to shareholders. Governors in Asia made secret deals with local rulers, creating personal monopolies using company soldiers. Middlemen jacked up prices, captains smuggled goods, and accountants cooked the books to hide losses. This isn't just speculation. VOC archives are filled with thousands of pages of complaints, investigations, and insider reports detailing widespread fraud. But corruption was only part of the problem. The bigger issue was the company's insane scale. Imagine trying to manage an enterprise spanning thousands of miles, hundreds of ships, and millions of people, all without email, phones, or even a telegraph. Letters took months to travel across the ocean. News of a rebellion or a storm might arrive long after it was too late to do anything about it. The company grew too big to control, and in the shadows, chaos and corruption flourished. Meanwhile, the world was changing. The Dutch Republic, once a scrappy underdog, now faced powerful rivals like England and France. A series of brutal wars drained the Dutch treasury and battered the VOC's fleets. In Asia, the British East India Company was on the rise, aggressively seizing territory and expanding its influence with far less bureaucracy. The VOC, bogged down and slow to react, struggled to compete. Its trade routes became more dangerous, costs soared, and profits shrank. Yet, back in Amsterdam, shareholders still demanded their high dividends. To keep up the illusion of success, the VOC started borrowing huge sums of money to pay them. It was a classic corporate trick. Hide your growing debts while pumping up your stock price. This kept the company afloat for a while, but it created a massive debt spiral that became impossible to escape. The final nail in the coffin came from a force no corporation could control: revolution. The late 1700s was an age of upheaval. The American and French revolutions sent shockwaves across the globe. In 1795, France invaded the Netherlands, overthrowing the old government and establishing a new republic. The powerful House of Orange, the royal family that had long supported the VOC, lost its grip on power. Without its political protectors, the company was exposed. It was already bankrupt in everything but name. Its debts were astronomical, its fleets were rotting, and its territories were either in revolt or had been snatched by competitors. In 1799, after nearly 200 years of dominance, the VOC was officially dissolved. The Dutch government took over its colonies, its debts, and its remaining assets. The world's greatest corporation was finally dead, but this is where the story gets really interesting. The VOC died, but its DNA is everywhere in the modern world. Let's start with finance. The VOC helped create the world's first modern stock market. The very idea of buying shares in a company, receiving dividends, and trading those shares on an open exchange was born in Amsterdam, all because of the VOC. Every stock traded today, from Tesla to Toyota, exists thanks to the financial plumbing the VOC helped invent. Then there's the idea of the multinational corporation itself. Before the VOC, businesses were mostly small and local. The VOC introduced the concept of permanent capital, global operations, and professional management, the blueprint for almost every major company today. Its structure, with departments for finance, logistics, and strategy, is a dead ringer for the corporate frameworks we still use. But its influence goes far beyond the economy. Many modern countries exist in their current form because of the VOC. Indonesia, one of the world's largest nations, was forged over centuries of VOC rule. South Africa's colonial history, its language, and its complex social dynamics all trace back to the VOC settlement at the Cape of Good Hope. For over 2 centuries, the VOC was Japan's only window to the Western world, shaping its relationship with Europe for generations. Even the global shipping lanes that our supply chains depend on today often mirror the routes charted by VOC ships hundreds of years ago. And what about that royal connection? While the VOC was dissolved, the House of Orange eventually returned to power. When the Kingdom of the Netherlands was formed in 1815, the dynasty came back stronger than ever. Many historians argue that the immense wealth generated by the VOC, directly or indirectly, helped secure the family's long-term power and influence. The art collections, estates, and political connections that survive to this day often trace their origins back to the VOC's golden age. It's a sensitive topic, but it shows how corporate profits from centuries ago can still echo in the halls of power today. Of course, we can't ignore the dark side of this legacy. The VOC's history is filled with pain, violence, and injustice. Entire cultures were destroyed by its ruthless pursuit of monopolies. Indigenous communities were displaced, and the company relied heavily on slavery, forced labor, and brutal suppression. Many of the social and economic inequalities that persist in former colonies can be traced directly back to the systems the VOC put in place. The straight lines on world maps that cut through ethnic and cultural groups? Many of those have roots in VOC-era decisions. This darker history is a crucial part of the story, a reminder of what can happen when corporate power goes completely unchecked. In a way, the story of the VOC is a warning from history. It shows how a corporation can become as powerful as a nation. It shows how innovation and exploitation can go hand in hand. And it reminds us that the world we live in, with its stock markets, global supply chains, and multinational giants, wasn't invented in the 20th century. It was forged in the chaotic, violent, and ambitious world of the 1600s. When we see trillion-dollar companies today, we think they're something new. But 400 years ago, a company worth nearly $8 trillion in today's money already existed. A company that commanded armies, ruled territories, and bent kings to its will. A company whose name 99% of people have never even heard. The Dutch East India Company wasn't just a business. It was the prototype for the modern world. Its story isn't just a relic of the past. It's the hidden blueprint of the system we all live in today. Thanks for watching. If you found this fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because the deeper you go into history, the more you realize it's full of secrets hiding in plain sight. See you next time.